Hi there, and welcome to this Thought Leadership video series where I'm thrilled to be joined by the Group Chief Information and Technology Officer at ABSA Bank, Johnson Idesoh. Johnson, thank you very much for your time.
Real pleasure to be here.
It's a very interesting arena and world that we're living at the moment. Let's talk about payments, let's talk about the digital landscape. How are ABSA adapting to this ever-growing, ever-evolving instant payments world that we live in?
That's a really interesting question. You know, on this continent, we are 54, 55 countries, dozens of currencies, billions already in cross-border payments. I saw a statistic the other day that said something like already $1 trillion in mobile payments on this continent. Our average age is about 20. So with that background, clearly we've got a group of customers who are just digitally native. The challenges we face on this continent, however, our regulation is clearly very different in every country. It's interesting, you look in the world today, it seems to be going more that way almost everywhere. And you know, there are still limitations, for instance, like most payments go off the African continent before they credit. So if I start a payment here in South Africa to someone in Kenya, I'm probably using SWIFT. For us in ABSA, we see payments really as a very strategic capability. We think it's important we're able to do things. Obviously, make them secure, but make them very economical. Because as we have more and more customers adopting payment systems, clearly your unit costs need to come down, which then gets you into a whole sort of interesting discussions about the technology you use, how you do it, etc. You know, but I would say from us at ABSA, we see it as one of our strategic platforms. You will hear us talk about payments as a service as an example. Already we're able to do, in the 11 markets we operate in on the continent, real-time payments. And clearly the growth we see is into the cross-border payments. You get into areas like crypto payments, etc. So it's really a fast evolving area and an area that as a bank, we think it's one we have to win in.
You mentioned payments as a service, and let's go into the deeper detail. So it seems like it's a very complex world when it comes to the payment solutions. So how do you, with these emerging technologies that we're living in, how do you prioritize what to invest in? APIs, cloud, blockchain? How do you approach that?
Again, it's a fascinating question. The way we think about it in ABSA is any of our investments, not just payments, anything in technology, first of all, is driven by our purpose as ABSA. You know, when you operate particularly on this continent, you've really got to understand what's your reason for being. And I think that's one of the things I'm really proud at ABSA. We are really clear on our purpose, empowering Africa's tomorrow together, one story at a time. Then, of course, it's got to fit into your values. Then, it's got to really make a difference to customers. So the way I always answer the question about how do you prioritize technology investments is to say you're driven by your purpose, your values, and then obviously your brand. You know, and our brand as ABSA that we're promising customers and clients is that first of all we're human and empathetic, very important. But secondly, we're seamless. So when it comes to things like our payments investments, how we choose whether it's APIs, how we leverage cloud, data, all the usual kind of buzzwords, that's always going to be our priority. Does it meet our purpose, our values? What difference does it make to our customers? And right now, obviously on the African continent, from a corporate point of view, there's one set of priorities, but a lot of our focus is empowering SMEs now. Because clearly on the continent, that's a big driver of growth. If you can get SMEs fluent in financial services and trading with each other and trading across borders, all of a sudden you can get flywheels in economic growth. So I hope I've answered the question. Really, you start with a set of your purpose, your values, and then a ruthless focus on the outcomes you're delivering to customers and clients. How does it help bring our brand to life?
Love it. It's very interesting. You've mentioned you're operating in 11 countries in this continent. So talking about digital payment solutions, what steps are the bank taking in order to make digital payment solutions a lot more accessible, simple, affordable, not just within South Africa where the base is, but also these other countries in what's known as Arrow?
Yeah, so let me give you one or two really practical examples. One of the things we've done is we've essentially made our smartphone a point of sale device. So, for the traditional approach to this is, if you're a merchant, if you're an SME, you need a circa $300 separate point of sale device. We've got technology, we call it MobiTap, that exists on a smartphone that SMEs are already able to use. So you can picture the kind of scene we're targeting. I'm an SME, I might be a trader in a market in Nairobi. To interact all of a sudden with a bank for payments, you no longer need the POS device, you now can just use your smartphone. So that's, certainly one example. Another example that I think is really important is one of our things in ABSA is we tend to be quite quiet, but we're the largest merchant acquirer on the continent. So, that does mean we've got a scale, which of course we can translate into a cost benefit with partners. So those are two examples that apply across the bank. Obviously, the acquiring statistic is right across the bank, so that applies also in South Africa. But the first example is a really nice example of a different approach to how you can help merchants acquire payments cheaply and effectively on a device that they're going to have anyway.
Indeed, no, wonderful answer. Let's take a step back because you've been with the bank now for just over 2 years,
Correct.
and 4 months. Talk to me about the infrastructure. I'm sure there's some legacy infrastructure that you maybe are experiencing. So how do you revamp and how do you modernize the current infrastructure landscape within ABSA?
That's another very interesting question. I say any organization more than 20 years old has legacy technology today. Because if we think about the rate at which technology is changing, let's just think about it. 2 years ago, very few of us knew anything about generative AI. In January this year, all of a sudden, DeepSeek arrives, completely new competition in AI. So the point I make here is, yes, we're a bank with 100 plus years of history. Our technology isn't quite 100 years old, but some of it is 40, 50 years old.
Yep.
And so therefore, I always start by saying the first thing is you've got to have a mindset that is curious enough to explore the art of the possible today with technology. Because the limitation with the technology is less that it's 40, 50 years old, and more that I developed it for the world of banking 40, 50 years old. And as customers, we know our expectations have changed in 10 years, talk less more of 50 years. So do we have the challenge of legacy technology that any company of our age and scale would have? Absolutely. We are driving ourselves to think back to my point about this ruthless focus on customer and outcome and how we make a difference to our customers' lives. And then, we're driving ourselves to think about how we exploit, and it's a word I use very deliberately, the latest in cloud data, AI technology. And increasingly with that mindset, what happens is you naturally manage down your legacy and you naturally build up what I call a digital era set of technologies. Are we in transition? Absolutely. Will we be in transition for a while to come? Yes, absolutely. But again, it goes back to your purpose, your vision, and are you just curious enough to work with this newer technology for the benefit of your customers? Maybe if I go back to payments for a second, a lot of what we've done in payments in modernization is we built fresh on cloud. So the reason we're able to do some of the things I talk about is we accepted the legacy was not going to move us into this future world, and we built fresh already in cloud. And in a lot of what we're doing, that's kind of the approach you see us adopting.
Yeah. In closing, funny story, I was with my mother about a month ago and we were in the car. She had coins in the middle of the center console for parking. And I thought, coins, I remember coins. Do you think coins are going to be extinct, or what do you think the future is for hard currency when we're talking about digital payments, Johnson?
Oh, that particularly on this continent is a very relevant question. Despite everything I say, we're still largely cash-based on this African continent. There is a cost to handling cash, both from a consumer point of view, but also a financial institution's point of view. It's very susceptible, of course, to things like fraud and theft and etc. I do think we will be seeing an increasing proportion of payments and transactions moving digitally. I think it's very important that the entire system, regulators, governments, banks, financial services, build trust in that process, because clearly that could easily be shaken. I can foresee on this continent the kind of thing happening that happened in India with UPI. You know, I've been going to India now for several years, but what's interesting is in this short space of time, literally you went from the trader on the street side taking cash to having a QR code that you scanned. And, you know, there have been parallels in Brazil as well, and certainly in South Africa, the way with the SAB we're beginning to think is much more this adoption of digital type payments. So, am I forecasting there'll be no cash in 10 years? No. But I do think the proportions will keep shifting. And I can't foresee a day where there's a lot more reliance on payments digitally right across this continent.
Thank you, Johnson. Always informative, always super insightful. I thank you so much for your time, and I'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Been a real pleasure.
Thanks, Johnson.